I was going to start out, Bill. You know, that's one of the. It seemed to be through Desperate Networks, this reoccurring theme that probably, if you looked at the top 10 shows right now,
yep,
at least half of them, and you chronicle them: American Idol, CSI,
right,
Survivor,
Grey's Anatomy,
Lost,
Desperate
Housewives.
Yeah,
That all of those shows that they. It seems that it was almost miraculous. It was almost like winning lotto that these got made.
They got on the air, and it's repeated, a pattern that gets repeated again and again. And particularly, I think, it's because all those shows were new and different in some way, and naturally, something that's new and different arriving on somebody's doorstep is, well, I don't know about this. Are people going to watch this? And there's a million reasons to say no, and usually those things get turned down, and it's only because of strange things that happen or somebody sticks their neck out and takes a chance on a show like, Lloyd Braun decides he's going to risk his career to get Lost onto ABC, and everyone else thinks he's crazy, and he gets the show on. And it seems to be a pattern that was repeated again and again. Of course, to me, I like those stories because, it really proves that the people that run the business, while many of them are very dedicated and really smart people, they don't know a thing. They really don't.
You mentioned Lost. I mean, the kind of the irony there was the two executives at ABC who were responsible, Lloyd Braun for getting Lost on the air, his partner there, Susan Lyne, who was responsible for Desperate Housewives to a certain degree.
Big degree, yes.
Neither of them was with. They both lost their jobs.
They were both fired before the shows went on. And
what do you think goes on? I mean, talk a little bit maybe about Lost and how that got on.
Well, that's a great one because, here's this guy, Lloyd Braun. He's working for ABC. He's very frustrated because the Disney people have basically micromanaged the network to the point where every decision is made by them, and it's extremely frustrating.
Disney owns ABC,
and they own it, and particularly when Michael Eisner was running Disney, he basically made every decision, right down to deciding like casts and everything. So, Braun was very frustrated. They hadn't really launched any good shows, and he had made a deal with this guy J.J. Abrams, who's a very important creative guy in Hollywood. And J.J. had delivered the show Alias to him, which was a good show. And did well for a while, but then really wasn't, a game changer, as they say.
Critics liked it better than the audience.
And it was, it was not a big hit. But because he had made a 4-year deal with JJ to develop shows for him, he was coming to the end of that deal, and he had nothing else to show for it. And he went to Abrams, and he said, you don't really owe me anything else, but you gave me one show. But boy, for 4 years, I was hoping to get something. And Abrams is a good guy, and he's very friendly with Lloyd. And he said, you're right. I'll try to give you something else. Even though the deal was coming to an end, he could have just blown it off, but he didn't. He didn't come up with Lost, though. He came up with a show about a bounty hunter. Okay, and Lloyd kind of liked that show. But in the meantime, he went off to Hawaii on vacation with his kids. And while he was in Hawaii, he was in his hotel room, and the Tom Hanks movie, Castaway, came on, and he's watching it in his hotel room. And he's thinking to himself, boy, this is an interesting movie, but I wonder if it could be a series if a whole bunch of people were on the island. What if you could? And his idea was really something like, just basically an abandoned tribe kind of a thing.
Swiss Family Robinson kind of thing.
Swiss Family Robinson, or more more along the lines of the William Golding novel.
Lord of the Flies.
Lord of the Flies. So he thought, a deteriorating society, etc. So he comes up with that idea, and he goes to a meeting that ABC has every year for anyone to come up with ideas. And I mean secretaries and business people, and everybody's supposed to sit in a room and pitch ideas. And, and each group, they break up into groups, and each group is supposed to deliver a drama, a comedy, and a reality show idea, and then the whole group meets, and they all talk about it. So they come to the meeting, and Lloyd has some other ideas, and he thinks they're all terrible. And he just sort of on the spot, he says, I have this other idea. It's about this thing. It's about this island. And now in his group, they're not going to say no to him. He's running the entertainment division. So that one does come up in the group meeting. And again, a lot of people in the group are like, man, how's that going to work? It sounds like Gilligan's Island. Come on. But one guy, the guy who was the head of the drama department, a guy named Tom Sherman, at the end of the meeting comes up and says, Lloyd, I like that idea. I do like that idea. Now, they probably would have made it anyway because it was Lloyd's idea. But they decide to make it. They go and they hire a writer. And the writer writes it, And he writes it the way Lloyd came up with it, which is kind of a Lord of the Flies thing and a society thing, and it's incredibly dull. It doesn't work at all, and Lloyd hates it, and he's just so frustrated it hasn't worked. And everyone else at ABC is like, well, that's a miss, and forget it, let's give up. But he goes home, he says, I can't give up on this. So he calls J.J. Abrams on the phone. He says, I got this other idea, and I want you to stop the bounty hunter thing. Can you just look at this? And he says, Lloyd, I'm doing this, and I'm developing Mission Impossible 3, which he was going to direct at the same time. But okay, I'll think about it. So he goes home, he thinks about it. He comes in, he says, look, there's good news and bad news. The good news is I have some ideas, and the bad news is I have some ideas for this. But he says, I can't write it. I can't. So they say, we have to find another guy who'll write it with you. So they go out, and all this has to happen right, or nothing works in this, right? So they find this guy named Damon Lindelof, and he had written a few things on television, a play, and he's kind of an offbeat writer who also, like J. Abrams, likes comic books and fantasy stuff like that. They meet, and they hit it off, and they have come up with some great ideas, and they go back to Lloyd, and they say, okay, here's the thing. The island is menacing them. There's something on the island menacing them, and it's actually a threat in there. And he's like, yes, this is great, this is great. So he commits to it based on an outline. There's no script.
And people here, I'm sure they don't know. How much money is he committing to? How much money is he going to spend on an idea?
He wound up spending $12 million on this pilot. Okay?
That's an outrageous
figure.
A typical pilot, if you spend $4 million is a lot of money.
And he winds up committing to it on an outline. And they go and they say, well, we got to go to Hawaii. We have to have a cast of about 50 people. We have to get a real airplane that we can blow up and blow apart. And they're like, and he's like, yes, and he's writing checks. And while he's doing this, the people at Disney are saying, are you insane? And they think he's crazy, and they hate the idea. And everybody else at Disney lines up and says, this is a bomb, this will never work. And J.J. Abrams, and Alias didn't work really, and we've spent so much money on this guy, and they're totally against it.
And Disney's known for being particularly cheap.
Tight with money. But he has spent so much money on it, they have to shoot the pilot. So they go off and they shoot the pilot, and at this point, in Hawaii, while they're shooting the pilot, Lloyd Braun is fired. He's fired and he's thrown out of the company. So now he's out of the company, and his baby is left behind with an orphan, nobody to protect it. So he's pulling like a back channel thing through the company, trying to keep this thing alive. And basically, he's saying it's so expensive, you got to put it on. ABC is saying it's so expensive, we'll put it on as a movie and get rid of it because they have no faith in it at all. At that point, Braun incredibly calls up NBC. And he pitches it to NBC.
Wait a second. His company, his employees paid $12 million for this thing,
and they own it.
And they own it.
And
he calls the competition and says, "I've got something great."
Yes, I got something great. They hate it, and he says, "I'll sneak you a pilot." And in the dead of night, he has an agent deliver the pilot to the mailbox of Kevin Riley, the entertainment chief of NBC, to see if he will. He's so desperate to get this thing on the air. Well, at that point, ABC does test the pilot, and it tests really great. And at this point, they're like, wow, well, I guess we got to put it on. And to their credit, I have to give them credit, they hated the show. They were against it. They thought it would fail. But when it tested well, they put a lot of marketing dollars behind it. They put it on the air, and from the first week on the air, it's a huge hit. And that show gets on the air only because all those circumstances lined up. And it's a really amazing but typical story.
How many people here saw the pilot
episode of Lost?
It really is something. It's like a feature film.
It's a fantastic.
And
they did in fact use a plane. They literally bought an out of circulation plane and delivered it to Hawaii so they could blow it up and make it look real.
Wow!
So a spectacular effort.
But there's something else here, but beyond chance. You did have in J.J. Abrams a really talented guy.
Exactly.
And a couple of real talented writers. You did have an executive who had true passion.
Exactly.
True passion for the piece. So that kind of pushed it through. It wasn't total luck.
It was a champion. And really, I do think one of the consistent things is there's always people who oppose these projects. But at some point, somebody champions it and says, you know what? I don't care what anyone else thinks. I think it'll work. So I'm going to put some of my capital behind it. And sometimes it's an unusual person. Like in Survivor, it's a guy who's literally a nobody at CBS working in their bullpen of offices, has no juice at all. He's basically a new guy sitting outside with the assistants, But because Survivor had gone around to so many people, he winds up taking the pitch from Mark Burnett. And he had gone to Harvard. His name is Gan Maynard.
Gan Maynard.
Right. And because he had gone to Harvard and had studied social psychology, this sounded to him like an experiment in social psychology, and he was into it. And he walks into Leslie Moonves's office. Now Leslie Moonves is like the king of CBS.
He's like the king of television.
Right,
I mean,
and he's the biggest guy going. So he goes into his office, and Leslie's at least willing to listen to ideas. But but Gan Maynard describes this to him. Well, it's real people, and they'll be on an island, and they won't have any food, and they'll have to have these challenges, and then they'll throw people off the island every week. And then the last guy will win $1 million. And Moonves says to him, "Gen, that's the stupidest idea I've ever heard," and throws him out of the office. But he believes in it so much, he goes around and gets allies inside CBS and says, "Listen to this Burnett guy. He could sell ice to Eskimos. He's incredible." So they get enough people behind it that they go back to Moonves, and more people are for it, and he's still against it, but he's more willing to listen, and eventually it gets on the air. So that's a guy who was a very low-level champion.
Who came in there.
And he saves the show. Let's go to the other end of the extreme, okay? So let's talk about
Well, there was one other element, but
Yeah.
just for a second here, too, and how the business of this works. With Survivor, an interesting thing he did, too, and Mark Burnett did, too, they basically sold the show to advertisers before it went on the air.
Yeah.
They got all these advertisers to come in, and that's why that first season, for those of you who remember it, were wearing the Reebok sports clothes, or they
Target
they
towels.
win a challenge and have a Budweiser or whatever.
Yeah.
And so they put this show on in August, which is the deadest time of the year in television business.
May. It was the last week of May.
Oh,
right. The season ended.
You're right.
The season ended. The regular season ended. The next week they put it on. So essentially they were starting and letting it run through the summer. Then nobody really ABC had done it the year before with Who Wants to Be a Millionaire.
And it worked really well.
It worked. So the idea for CBS was, let's throw this thing on in the summer when
there's
nothing
no
else
risk.
is on.
We sold it.
And there's no risk. And that's why it got on. That's another reason it got on. Because Les Moonves could say, well, if this thing fails, what do I didn't lose anything.
I made some money.
The advertisers are paid for it. I don't have to worry about it. It's on the air. It came back to haunt him a little because he had to sign off on the part ownership of the show to Mark Burnett. And he wound up not making as much money in the long run, but they made plenty on it. But yes, that's another reason that show got on the air, because it was a no-fail situation.
Now you write at length about American Idol. Here was another show that also. I mean, here's a show. I mean, this is beyond a hit. This is a cultural phenomenon.
Yes. So here's a show. Three British guys named Simon. All three of them named Simon. Come from England, and they have an idea for a show. They've already sold it to the British network. They figure, let's get an American network signed up. So they show up and they go to every network, including Fox, by the way. And they pitch the show and they describe what it's going to be. And people are like, who are these guys? They're like, no, but in England they're kind of big guys because they develop music and all that. But nobody in America knows these guys.
I mean, Simon Cowell had a huge career as a music producer.
He was,
had a whole string of number one.
An A&R man. He was very, very big. And the other guy discovered the Spice Girls. So I mean, they were well known in England, but in America, who are these guys? And they're trying to explain the show, and people are like throwing them out of the office, and they have no interest in them. And it had
already been a hit in England.
No, it wasn't on yet. The first time they went, it had not been on the air yet. So they had nothing to show for it. They just had to pitch the idea. They couldn't show them a tape. But basically, everybody rejected them. They go back to England. They put the show on the air in England. It's a huge hit in England. Now they figure, okay, now we have a tape to show. Let's go back. So they go back, and among the people they meet is Andrea Wong, who's the head of reality at ABC. And Andrea had rejected it the first time. They come back to her and say, Andrea, we have a tape now. She says, great, let me see it. Bring it to her. She says, no, I still don't want it. She rejects it again.
How many sleepless nights is she having about saying no to that?
For Andrea, she brought Dancing with the Stars to ABC. That's
and The Bachelor and all that stuff.
Anyway, so now the show comes to Fox, and they're the last place to go. And Fox has nothing going in the summer, absolutely nothing. So they're like, well, we'll put this on, but we won't pay you for it. And they're like, well, wait a minute, we won't pay you for it? No, we'll put it on if it's free. So naturally, the British guys are like, well, we're not going to. And they had some pretty good agents. They had agents at CAA at the time. And they're basically continuing this negotiation, even though it's going absolutely nowhere. And the Fox executives are all saying to themselves, this will never work. It's not worth the money. Why should we spend the money? They tell them, go use the survivor model. You go out and get advertisers, and it don't want no risk for us.
And we'll
then
put this
maybe
on.
we'll consider putting it on. But we won't pay you a nickel for it. There's no way.